Okay, joining me today is Roger Baker. We're going to discuss Afghanistan. I'm Charles. I'm the global security analyst, and with me is Roger Baker, and we're going to discuss security developments in Afghanistan. So, I guess to kick us off, Roger, I guess, where are we right now in terms of Afghanistan? We're about a year and a half, or actually almost 2 years after the fall of the capital, Kabul. So where are we at this point in terms of Afghan security? Um, in terms of Afghanistan security situation.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things to look at is clearly the situation did not reach that worst case fear when the U.S. finished its withdrawal and when the Taliban took over. At the time, there were all sorts of expectations or concerns that we would rapidly be pulled back into a late 1990s, early 2000 Afghanistan, which would become both an internal center of conflict and a place for planning and carrying out international terrorist operations. And the thing that we've seen instead is, you know, um, constrained chaos. The Taliban leadership has been able to assert authority over fairly large swaths of the country. The leadership is not entirely aligned from the center all the way out to the localities, and there's still militancy, there's still counter Taliban fighting, and there's still the threat of ISKP and their operations. But the worst of the security situations hasn't materialized. That's not to downplay the humanitarian crisis that's taking place, the food and water crises that are going on, and the reversals of some of the more liberal social dynamics that were brought into play during the time of basically Western occupation of Afghanistan.
Yep, yep. And what's the impact so far regionally on Afghanistan's security situation? I mean, you characterize it as kind of controlled chaos. What's been the impact on Pakistan and other countries in the region?
Right. I mean, I'd look first up at the borders along and around Central Asia, and again, traditionally, the Central Asian states were the hosts or the supporters of some of the core factions that were operating against the Taliban in Afghanistan in the 1990s. So the Uzbeks and the Tajiks. And one of the things that we've seen is that although the main opposition militant forces, the Tajik forces, the Uzbek forces, are being given, and their political components appear to be given shelter in the Central Asian states, these Central Asian countries are also carrying out some work with the Taliban. They're allowing the Taliban representatives to take over consulates in their country, Afghan consulates. Um, so they seem to be trying to make sure that that Afghanistan doesn't devolve into a site of civil war. They give host to opposition forces, but they're not necessarily at the moment supporting them in carrying out counteroffensives against the Taliban. And I think one of the things we're seeing in the whole region is that one, there's a general view by all of the neighboring countries in Afghanistan that nobody wants to get involved and have to take control of Afghanistan. That's a horrible thing to do. The Americans found that out, the Russians found that out, the British found that out, everybody has found that out. The second is that um, so long as the Taliban is providing some basic services and keeping the country from collapsing or falling into civil war, then there should be some tacit arrangements with them, even if it's not formal recognition. It's non-formal recognition that they are actually the ones running the country, and therefore you're going to have to engage with them and deal with them and interact with them um, to be operational. And the third recognition, though, is that the West is not interested in Afghanistan. And if the West is not interested in Afghanistan in an active manner and not actively trying to oust the Taliban any longer, just passively or not even caring about it, then there's really no likelihood of these opposition forces having the capacity to oust the Taliban. And therefore, why even permit them to try? That just drives you into the civil war space. The Chinese border hasn't had the real problems. The Chinese were about it. I think, as you raised, though, Pakistan is the real key, right? When we think about what's happening here, because ISKP is this internationalist threat, regional and internationalist threat. The Taliban clearly is targeting ISKP. There may or may not be some intelligence sharing going on. We've seen some adjustments in the Taliban's capabilities against the ISKP over the last couple of months that may suggest somebody's helping them out a little bit in targeting that. And there is alignment between the Taliban and the United States and the Chinese and everyone on targeting ISKP. But it's the TTP. And the TTP, the Pakistani Taliban, as it's sometimes called, that operates out of Afghanistan, that was a real key to the Taliban's longevity during the U.S. occupation of Afghanistan, that is relatively aligned with the Taliban and with their interests, but continues to carry out activities and operations in Pakistan. And we just saw another round of attacks into Pakistan targeting schools and things of that sort. And so this activity continues to take place. And there's actually a meeting taking place today and tomorrow between Pakistan, Afghanistan, and China. And it's talking about economic stability. It's talking about the future political inclusiveness of Afghanistan. But I think one of the things that's going to be on the table is this idea of the TTP and militancy spilling over the Pakistani border.
Yep, yep. And that the subject of militancy kind of brings up the only driver that could ever potentially, and I say ever potentially insofar as it's highly unlikely, bring the West back into having any interest in Afghanistan. That is the potential external threat of militancy. We talked a little bit about ISKP, and you think ISKP generally isn't going to develop. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but do you think ISKP is going to develop along the track to be a global threat, or is it too soon to tell? Or what would you?
We have some, we're doing some real intense work on that internally, and we have some really active discussions looking at the evidence from different perspectives. My assessment at the moment is that the situation in Afghanistan today is far different than the situation in Afghanistan 98 through 2000, 2001. The relationship between the Taliban and the ISKP is one of animosity. The relationship between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda was one of cooperation and friendship. The Taliban provided Al-Qaeda with a free operating environment that allowed Al-Qaeda to utilize the space for developing new cadres, for developing ideas, for being able to meet, to be able to move money, to be able to move material, things of that sort. That dynamic is not there for the ISKP in Afghanistan. We're seeing the ISKP moving to more of a virtual and decentralized structure. Well, that means also that maybe Afghanistan is not nearly as important, right? There were those warnings of ISKP planning or plotting for attacks overseas, but a lot of those are not necessarily ISKP in Afghanistan, bringing people together, training the cadre, deploying them out to the countries. It's inspiration via the web. It's idea generation rather than active training. So I think that that's a real difference between what we're seeing there now and what we saw in the past. And so those are things that limit the ability of ISKP to use Afghanistan as a safe sanctuary to be able to carry out direct operations against European targets or American targets far abroad. They can operate within the region. They certainly operate within Afghanistan. But we also see not just the Taliban, we're seeing foreign countries continue to target ISKP. And I think that, the US clearly has some sort of arrangement in region to be able to continue unmanned airstrikes toward ISKP in Afghanistan.
Yeah, this is a really interesting dynamic. I know it wasn't part of our plan, but what's the status right now between the Taliban and the remnants of Al-Qaeda? What is their current relationship in your point of view, from your point of view? I know Ayman al-Zawahiri was killed last year, and there's been a debate as to was he an invited guest of certain elements of Taliban leadership, or what was his status as far as the Taliban is concerned.
Right. As far as we can see, the Taliban is still very friendly with Al-Qaeda, but they are also constraining al-Qaeda to keep the focus inside Afghanistan. The thing the Taliban learned the last time around is that if they allow their territory to be utilized to carry out a massive strike upon the United States, then the United States is going to reciprocate. And that is not something that the Taliban is looking for, at least not at the moment while they're still trying to consolidate. Well, they don't have the security dynamic in their own country. That's not something that they want. And so I think they're friendly. They're coordinating with Al Qaeda to some extent, some elements of Al Qaeda within Afghanistan. But as we can see, they're not in support of major international terrorist operations taking place from their territory. They're still in that consolidation phase. Again, the big challenge for them, I would argue, is TTP and their relationship with Pakistan. And one of the things, I know we're pushing time now, and we'll have to close, but we'll leave it with a kind of a cliffhanger here. If we see that TTP activity continue to expand in Pakistan, and we're seeing the TTP reach out to some of the Baluch separatists, that targets Chinese interests, that targets Pakistani interests. Pakistan is already in a bit of a politically shaky situation. It's an economically shaky situation. And if this militancy starts spreading and adds to that instability in Pakistan, we always have to remember, Pakistan is a nuclear nation. Instability in a nuclear power is not necessarily positive for the rest of the world. The Chinese have a very strong interest in there. And the expansion to Pakistan, that's where we could see a commonality of, say, US and Chinese interests in finding some way to intervene, not necessarily in Afghanistan, but certainly in shoring up Pakistan's national security.
Yep, that makes perfect sense. I think, given that cliffhanger, I'll pause real quick here and see if we have any audience questions. Just see if anyone in the audience has questions who's watching here. All right, then. Roger, thank you for joining us today. Please go to ranenetwork.com to learn more about our work and subscribe. We'll be